In this video, we're going to use the Journal Citation Reports tool as a way of identifying a journal's impact factor. Now, one key way of evaluating research is looking at the quality and impact of the journal where it's published. Now, there are lots and lots of journals out there. With the explosion of online journals and more simple publishing processes, the number of journals has really grown. And in that ocean of journals, there are top-of-the-line journals, and there's good journals, and so-so journals, and really questionable journals. Now, we have a whole nother video on the issue of bad journals and predatory publishing. You'll definitely want to watch that one. So, how do you determine if something is published in a good or shady journal? Now, one way is to consider how other researchers are using that specific journal. Presumably, if a journal is publishing research papers that other researchers are reading and then citing those papers in their own research publications, that's probably a sign that it's a pretty good journal. On the other hand, if a journal is publishing studies that no one ever seems to read and no researchers ever seem to cite or reference in their own work, then it's probably not a particularly strong journal. In essence, the more researchers are citing research published in a given journal, the stronger that journal probably is. So, how do we know how often a specific journal is being cited? We can get that information from an online resource called the Journal Citation Reports. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, to access the Journal Citation Reports, or JCR as we call it for short, the first thing you need to do is log into the UMS portal. So here I've logged into the system portal. You go to the Fogler Library. So here's Fogler Library. I'm clicking on that. Takes us to the library. And what we want is a database. This is an online database. So we come down here, specifically select databases. And then we want the Journal Citation Reports. And so let's scroll down. I could just scroll all the way to J, but I'm going to jump. And we see Journal Citation Reports. So I click on that, and it'll take me to the JCR homepage. All right, so here we are at the JCR homepage, and all we need to do is we just type in the name of the journal. You can type in a category if you want to get a list of possible journals. You could do like educational psychology or language development, maybe, keywords as well. You can kind of fish for a bunch of journals like that, but typically you have a specific journal in mind that you're looking for. In this case, at the time I'm making this video, I just had a paper come out in the journal Pediatrics. So let's take a look at what Pediatrics, how that appears. So I'm going to type in Pediatrics. And it pops up a bunch of names, any journals that have the word pediatrics somewhere in the title. And notice there's a whole bunch, even 36 more that we could pick from. But the one I want is Pediatrics. So I'm going to select that. Make sure you pick the right journal. And here we are at the JCR report for the journal Pediatrics. So we've got the name. Notice the JCR year is 2020. Is the most recent year, but you can go back and look at reports going back years if you want. We'll just keep it simple and focus on the year 2020. Then over here on the right, it has some information about the journal. It's published in English. Its publisher is the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is a great organization. Another sign of a good journal is kind of who's the publisher. It comes out 12 times a year. And we keep scrolling down and we get into the performance indicators. All right? So let's start with the journal impact factor. Now, as we talked about before, the journal impact factor gets at the idea of how often are articles for a given journal being cited by other researchers. So if we look at the journal Pediatrics, right, the 2020 journal impact factor we see right here is a 7.124, which is a very good number. But what does it mean? And where does it come from? Well, one of the things I like about JCR is it tells you right here how to do the calculation. So you pop this up and it tells you how that 2020 impact factor was calculated. And we see that the way it works is it looks at, starts with, if we're looking at the year 2020, it looks at all of the publications that JCR, all of the journals JCR is tracking, not just pediatrics, but all of them in the year 2020. And then it looks at all the papers that are in those journals and all the papers those papers are citing, all the research that's being cited in the year 2020, and how many of those citations are specifically for articles that were published in the journal Pediatrics, our journal. How many were published in Pediatrics in 2018 and 2019? So for the year 2020, it looks at all the publications that are out there. And how in all of those publications, how many citations in 2020 are for pediatrics articles in 2019 and 2018. So going back 2 years to give time for papers to get out there and people to read them and then cite them in their next publication that they do in 2020. So we can actually see how the numbers work for that part of the equation. So we see in 2020, all the articles that were published that JCR tracks, there were 4,870 citations for pediatrics articles in 2018. And there were 2,731 citations for pediatrics articles that were published in 2019, which gives us a total of 7,601 citations in 2020 for pediatrics articles published in 2018 and 2019, that 2-year window. So that's the total number of citations. And then we divide that total number of citations by how many articles there actually were that could have been cited. So it kind of gives us an average number of citations in that, for those articles. So we look at how many articles, how many what's called citable items there were in pediatrics in 2018. There were 583, and there were 484 citable items published in pediatrics in 2019, which gives us a total of 1,067. You just divide then the total number of citations, 7,601, divided by 1,067 possible articles that could be cited, and it gives you 7.124. Now, you may wonder, what do you mean by citable item? Why not just say papers? Well, that's because sometimes some things are published that really aren't citable. No one's ever going to cite them. I think an example is journals will sometimes include a brief report at the end of the year thanking everybody who reviewed for them, and they list everybody's name and affiliation. Thank you that you served as a reviewer this year. No one's ever going to cite that as in research, so you don't want it to count as one of those things that as one of those publications that could have been cited, because it's always going to be zero. So by citable item, it doesn't count things that are not going to be cited, because of the very nature, the essence of what it is. Now, there's other ways people calculate and call impact factors. There's other entities will calculate impact factors in different ways and talk about them. But the JCR impact factor, this number, is probably the single most widely used. If there's one number that tells you how good a journal is, one number that journals will brag about if it looks good, it's the JCR impact factor, this number here. And again, what I like about it is they tell you how it's calculated. Some people will say it's I can't think of one off the top of my head, but like a Mason impact factor, and they don't tell you how it was calculated. Just trust me, it's whatever the number is. I don't like that. JCR is very transparent, which is nice. and also just helps you to understand what that number means. You'll notice there's one other impact factor right next to it that says the journal impact factor without self-citations, and that's 6.792. And what this number does, it's a slight, which is still that's a phenomenal number. But what it does is it adjusts the impact factor for what are called self-citations. And there's really, what happens is journals often, journals will naturally end up citing themselves. Publications, so there'll be publications that come out in pediatrics that are citing publications that came out in pediatrics. And journals kind of like that because it helps to keep their numbers up and helps to make their impact factors high. And so one strategy is, well, let's not even count. Let's deduct all those self-citations. So it's only journals that aren't pediatrics citing our pediatrics citations. And so you can see it kind of in the calculation here. We got that same 7,601, but now it's subtracting out 354 times. That 354 of those citations were pediatrics in 2020, citing one of the pediatrics articles from 2018 or 19, which brings the score down a little bit. Now, this without self-citations is probably used a little less often. When I was younger, I think this was more of an issue. There were journals that you knew liked self-citations. And if you wanted to get in their journal, you needed to make sure you cited a lot of stuff from that journal in your reference list. And it looked good. Now, part of it is it also just helps the journal. If you're a top journal, or you think you're a top journal, and they're not citing you, then how could this be comprehensive if they're missing stuff that isn't in your top journal? So part of it was sincere. Part of it, I think, might be a little, we like those self-citations. But sometimes in niche areas, it's hard to avoid self-citations. If it's a small discipline that's very narrow, and there's not a lot of specialized journals in that area, a lot of them are going to have to be self-citations. So it's you have to kind of think about this before you just either run with it or not. But that's kind of summarizing the journal impact factor. Now you'll also notice that to the right, we have a list of all the articles from that 2-year period, all 1,067, that contributed to that impact factor. You can kind of scroll through here and see for the different articles and how many times they were cited. So starting with this one that was cited 197 times, that's phenomenal. If you click on it, it gives you a little bit more information about the authors, but it also includes a link here just in case for some reason you want to track this article down that was so widely cited. You can click on this link and it'll take you to the Web of Science, where you'll actually be able to see more detail specifically about that article, where remember the JCR is talking about the journal. This will take you to information about that specific article, but that's for another video. It also gives you click on all the citable items, or you can click on the citing sources that give you all of the different sources that cited these pediatrics papers. So all of the different journals all of the different journals in 2020 that cited a pediatrics article published in 2018 or 2019. So it gives you a sense of where are the journals that are publishing based on pediatrics research. So you can see here, Journal of Pediatrics, International Journal of Environmental Health and Public Health, kind of makes sense. Pediatrics research, lots of good journals. So let's scroll down a little bit. And going back over here, you see here is a bar chart showing impact factors over the last 5 years. So we see the impact factor each year. You can hover over it and it kind of pops up and gives you a little more information. The impact factor each year, we can see it kind of took a jump. The bars specifically, to be clear, are what the impact factor is each year. But then this line at the top tells you the percentile rank within that category of journals in JCR. Kind of what's the percentile rank based on the journal impact factor. So we see its impact, the pediatrics is around the 97th percentile ranking based on its impact factor among pediatrics journals. So let's scroll down some more. Now, impact factors can vary a fair degree between areas or disciplines and fields. In some disciplines, it may be traditional to include extensive literature reviews as part of the introduction to an article. In others, it may be very streamlined, which will influence how many citations there are in articles, which will influence how often they're being cited and can influence the impact factors. So you can end up in a situation where a impact factor of 4 in one discipline isn't as impressive as an impact factor of 2 in another discipline, right? So it's kind of hard to compare sometimes. So one approach to getting around that is using the journal citation indicator. And what the journal citation indicator does is it standardizes the impact factors kind of based on the category of that journal, of that discipline, kind of what's the category of the journal, kind of what's the discipline, the field. It takes into consideration things like the type of journal, the year it's in, the subject area, how the volume that it does, and standardizes that so that it's relative. Your number of citations are relative to what you would have expected for a journal of that type in that category at that point in time. So a journal citation indicator of 1 tells you that the number of citations in a 3-year period is exactly what you would have expected. So it's right, they're the same number. How many did you expect? And you got exactly that number of citations. Gives you a journal citation indicator of 1. Says that you're right on the you're right on the average. You're getting the average number of citations that you would have expected. A journal citation indicator greater than 1 tells you that there's more citations than you would have expected. So for example, a journal citation indicator of 1.5 tells you there's 50% more citations than you would have expected. A 2 tells you there's double the number of citations given the discipline and the years and the subject area, whatever. There's double the number of citations that you would have expected. Journal citation indicator less than 1 tells you that, well, there's fewer citations than you would have expected for that journal. So it's a little below what you would have, below average. In this case, a 2.66 is great. It's well above the average number of citations. Again, for a journal in this area, based on the year and the type of art topics and everything. Okay. Then we also see the total citations, and this is just looking in the year 2020, all the articles in all of the journals that JCR tracks. How many citations are there for any article published in pediatrics, going back to whenever. So there's 95,966 citations in the year 2020 towards 2 citations of pediatrics articles or research published in pediatrics. Okay, let's keep going. We then come to the citation distribution. This shows us the distribution of how many citations there are for all of the articles that went into the calculation of our journal impact factor. It does so kind of based on a little bit of information on the type of article. Is it a research article? Is it a review article that that's kind of reviewing the literature rather than and kind of doing an empirical research, or is it something else? So we can, for example, let's pick a number here. We'll look at 8, right? It's very interactive, kind of very, very cool. And we see that there were 59 plus 5 plus 1, so there's 60 items that were published by pediatrics in 2018, 2019, 59 of them that were cited exactly 8 times. And of those that were items that were cited exactly 8 times, 59 of them were articles, kind of your research articles. 5 of them were review articles. And 1 of them was something else, but they were all cited exactly 8 times. Now, what's kind of interesting with this is that you notice it also gives us the median number of citations for articles and the median number of citations for reviews. And there's kind of an important general point here that notice reviews tend to have more citations. That if you think about it, that actually makes sense. If someone has done a great literature review of autism, then that may be cited all the time when people are then doing other research studies. They may cite your literature review. Literature reviews tend to get a lot of citations on average compared to other types of research. So they'll be cited more. Journals that publish a lot of review articles tend to have higher impact factors as a result of that. So it's one of the things you kind of want to keep in mind. If they're a little different, and you see this pattern all the time. That the reviews, the median for review articles will have more citations than research articles. One other thing it notices says there's 368 unlinked citations, and these are citations that were clearly coming out of pediatrics in that time window, but they couldn't figure out basically there's errors in the citation, missing information. They couldn't figure out exactly which article it was. So it counts towards the journal impact factor, but you can't credit it to a specific article in that case. All right, let's keep scrolling down. Then some kind of interesting information here. If you're someone interested in open access, that it just gives you kind of some data on how accessible is the information, and it's kind of graphing it based on the is it open or is it a subscription or service. So you can see. In this case, there's no open, nothing's free. It's kind of what this is getting at. Nothing's free with pediatrics. It's a paid journal, and you're seeing that show up. So, that can influence the access to the articles. So kind of a newer thing people are starting to pay attention to. Let's keep going. Then we have the rank based on the journal impact factor, kind of looking back over the last few years, and we see within the category of pediatrics journals, it's 4 out of 129, which is very good. Kind of the percentile rank was 27.29, again based on the journal impact factor, places it in the top quartile. And you can look at going back multiple years. All right. Let's keep going. We can go way down there. Let's keep scrolling down. We don't need to go back too far. Then the rank based on the journal citation indicator, it's probably going to be fairly similar, which we see here. 3 out of 176, 98.6%. Again, very good. And then it shifts gears a bit and gives us information kind of about what's happening in the journal this year, kind of what are the nature of articles and items that they're publishing. So we see here under source data that in the year 2020, the pediatrics published 518 articles, 37 reviews, and 192 other types of documents. Gives you some kind of the percentage of each. Gives you how many references there were among those articles, how many references there were in the review articles, in the reviews, right? And then kind of the average number of references in the articles and the average number in reviews. And you see, not surprisingly, the reviews have more than twice as many references because it's a review of the literature, right? So it'll have more. Then we have the average GIF percentile, and in this case, you notice it's the same number, but it's possible that a journal appears in more than one type of category. You might have a journal that falls in the category of education and may also fall in the category of educational psychology and may fall under psychology. That there may be multiple categories that a journal falls into, and each of those, its impact within those different fields may be different. So it'll have a different journal impact factor. So if it's covered across several disciplines, several of those categories, here you can get the average journal impact factor across all of those. Then we have information about the authors of articles that have or items that have appeared in the last 3 years, kind of organized based on the home of that author, kind of the academic home of the author. So we see that Harvard University is having as a university, it's got the most authors publishing in pediatrics, followed by University of Pennsylvania, followed by the University of California system, which kind of surprises me because that's huge, that's the whole system. I'd have thought that they'd be number one, but because there's so many of them and some really great schools. But it is what it is, I guess. And then also kind of the home of those, the regional home of the authors that have published in the last 3 years. And we see, not surprisingly by far, the U.S. is number one. Additional metrics, this is kind of funny. Eigenfactors, ooh, I love eigenfactors. But I digress. You don't really see this reported much other than people who are doing research on how do you measure the impact of journals. There's a whole discipline of people figuring out what's the best ways to evaluate journals. And they'll look at this. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. In essence, what the eigenfactor does, that conceptually it's kind of an interesting idea. It's based on or I should say it reflects the idea that not all citations are equal, right? And if you think about it, that makes sense. If I publish a paper and I get one citation and it's in a mediocre journal that nobody reads, that nobody ever cites and no one cares about, and you publish a paper and it gets one citation in the biggest journal in the universe that everybody reads and everybody cites and everybody loves that huge giant journal, that citation is more impactful than mine that nobody's ever going to read. So the eigenfactor kind of it doesn't just look at how many citations, it also takes into consideration who's making those citations. And if it's a citation in a source that itself gets lots of citations, it counts more. So there's almost a tongue twister quality there, but that's what these are just ways of getting at that idea. Then we also have the what's a 5-year impact factor, which is just like the 2-year impact factor, but now it covers 5 years instead. I actually like this because 2 years is a very quick turnaround, particularly for some disciplines. If journals aren't publishing monthly, then it's hard to get a quick turnaround in a short period of time, because you've got to publish, people have to read it, they have to then incorporate your study, your citation into their next paper, and then that paper has to be written and it's got to be published, and then it's got to be reviewed, and then it's got to get published. It can take a few years between when you've published a paper and when it starts being cited. So I like 5 years, I think is a nicer number. Again, particularly it varies discipline to discipline. Some disciplines have very quick turnarounds. Others, it can take a little more time. Here's the calculation. You can kind of see it's exactly the way it was before. How many citations in all of 2020? How many of them were for items specifically appearing in pediatrics in 2015 to 2019, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 5 years, right? Divided by the total number of citable items during that time period, and you get an 8.109 5-year impact factor. And then there's the immediacy index. Again, this kind of reflects what I just said, that this is the looking specifically at it's the same sort of impact factor, but it's looking at items published in 2020 that were cited in 2020. So this is stuff that is hot off the press and immediately getting cited. Again, for some disciplines, that just doesn't happen. But in others, medical fields, for example, you may see this happen a lot more because they're publishing more and there's a quick turnaround. You've published something on COVID, people are citing it like the next week. So they can have a quicker immediacy. So kind of disciplines, it will vary, so it really kind of depends where you're at. This can be useful, particularly, again, in some disciplines, that it tells you these are the ones that are just having, they're attracting attention really quickly in those journals, if you want to cite there. Okay? So that is the Journal Citation Reports. Pretty good. Again, kind of if there's a single big thing here, it's the one we talked about at the beginning. The journal impact factor gives you that probably the most widely single snapshot of the impact of a journal that a journal is having. And then just lots of additional information you can look at to get a sense of what's happening with different sources. So I hope you found this useful, and take care. Bye-bye.